Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining LEDE New Orleans and myself, Jennifer Larino, for today's mini workshop that we're going to do virtually. We are going to be digging in today with this workshop on how to develop a story idea. I think a lot of us are good about coming up with story ideas and throwing things on paper, but how do we really dig into a story idea and make sure that it's strong and craft a story pitch that editors at magazines or newspapers or at digital media sites will be interested in. So there's a little bit more to it. This is, by the way, a part of a series of workshops that LEDE New Orleans does all about how to develop a story idea. I highly encourage you after the session, if you like what you experienced here, to go ahead and check us out at www.ledenolaorg/events to see when you can join us for a live session. But let's go ahead and move forward. We're going to jump around because we have some slides from our live sessions that we normally do. But first, I want you to get to know what LEDE New Orleans is. So again, my name is Jennifer Larino. I am a journalist here in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I am co-founder of LEDE New Orleans. What is LEDE New Orleans? LEDE New Orleans is a nonprofit organization that trains Black, Brown, Latinx, Asian, and LGBTQ plus youth in our city here in New Orleans, age 18 to 25, to do community reporting. We teach young people how to do on the ground in the field community reporting. We teach the basics and then we turn around and we apply those learnings to doing actual reporting about marginalized communities in and around New Orleans. So you'll see here on this slide a few pictures of our fellows in the past. We have a fellowship program that I'll tell you a bit more about. But we have two ways that we pursue our equity mission in media, which is to create newsrooms that better reflect our communities. Right now, newsrooms are very white and not very diverse. So our mission is to bring more voices into the fold and strengthen communities in the process. So again, we do that in two ways. We have our media education arm, which is a taste of what you'll see today, where we do workshops about various journalism topics that are free and open to the public age 16 plus. So you're welcome to join us. And then we also have a reporting fellowship. This is a 14-week fellowship that supports Black, Brown, Latinx, Asian, and LGBTQ plus youth ages 18 to 25 to learn community reporting skills and put them to work in our neighborhoods here in New Orleans. So that's a little bit about myself and about LEDE New Orleans, the organization behind and facilitating this workshop. What are we going to be doing today? So our agenda is going to start with a group brainstorm. I know that we're virtual right now, and you'll be watching this on your own time, but we're going to do our best to kind of simulate what a brainstorm session will be like. So I'll be asking you to pause at certain points and work on your own. In addition to following along with you and doing the work. We're also, after our group brainstorm, we're going to jump into our main workshop session, which will cover what makes news, right? What are the fundamentals? This might be a review for some of you who have really started working in journalism already. We'll have a group discussion about newsworthiness, and then we'll start developing an idea. And talk about what it takes to dig into an idea and really develop it into a pitch. And then we'll end today's session with a little group workshop, actually developing an idea, and I'll walk you through some of the things that I think about when I develop some of my story ideas, and that I thought about when I was a reporter at the Times-Picayune and working with the newsroom there. And finally, we'll close it out. We will be asking y'all to take a survey about this session that just gives us feedback on how to make these things better. We highly appreciate you participating in that. So that will be at the end. We do have a few resources that will be popping up throughout this session. Two worksheets, and then of course that survey at the end. We will look for links in the actual YouTube video of this, as well as sent to you through the conference. These are just a few of our values. Because we're not live, we don't need to go through these as much, but I want to highlight Ask Why. At LEDE New Orleans, that's a core practice of ours. And that is that the foundation of that is to challenge your assumptions, right? As journalists, that's something we should be doing a lot, but sometimes, we forget about that. So challenge what you think you know about the world around you, and really try to do that in all aspects of your life. So we're going to start today's session with a group brainstorm. I know we're all kind of separate right now, but the idea is to brainstorm local story ideas about climate change. So this is where our first resource and worksheet is going to pop up here. So I'm going to bring that up, and I've actually already started got a head start in brainstorming some story ideas about climate change and some local angles on that. So this is what our Getting the Idea worksheet looks like. This is from our first workshop in this How to Develop a Story Idea series. But this basically walks you through the steps of how do you take something you notice in your community around you and dig into that a little bit more to flesh out an idea, right? So this is really the step before we get to developing the idea. But what does that process look like? So I have a few examples here, and I'm going to tell you to pause after this to write down some of your own. But I was thinking about a few things I'd read recently about climate change. I live in New Orleans, so that's my local tie in geography. But I had read, I remember reading even last year about how the coronavirus caused a record drop in fossil fuel emissions in 2020. This is globally, right? And to me, I was thinking of it kind of in how some of the ways that we experience climate change and especially air emissions stuff in South Louisiana. And I know like every summer we have like air quality alerts going out just because of the heat and the industry that is in South Louisiana combined with fossil fuel emissions, just this toxic combination. I didn't really notice a lot of air quality alerts last summer, maybe just because I wasn't going out places, but I wanted to learn more about how coronavirus and some of the closures and fewer people being out might have affected Louisiana's air quality last year and headed into this year. And I think about why the community might be interested in this. You have a lot of people with asthma. You have people who are concerned about their health, and they want to know more about air quality. And there is a real community health aspect to that. I was also thinking about climate change in relation to hurricanes. Last year's hurricane season was insane, right? Like if you were in Louisiana, you knew what that was like to have hurricanes, almost every other week, it seemed like in the fall. Why I want to learn more about why that was. Is it attributable to climate change? What can we expect in the future? And that's because I live here, right? I have an interest, and I know a lot of people that live here too, and would be interested to know, like, what can we expect? Is this a symptom of climate change? And then the last idea I had put on here, I had been reading about how really like young kids, elementary school kids, are learning about climate change, and they're developing anxiety around climate change and how it will impact their generation, which just really stuck with me, right? This is a national story, but I'm really interested in learning how young children, especially in New Orleans, where we deal with flooding, and these very tangible, visible aspects of climate change, how are they coping? How are they working through this? Are we seeing anxiety around that? Why this interested me, I think it's because we tend to think of climate change as a political problem, right? This shows that it affects people, and young people especially, who don't really have control right now to change how people are acting. So Lastly, why would this matter to the community that I'd be writing for? Well, parents want to know how to talk to their kids about a lot of stuff, and this is going to be one of those things. So that's why I think this is a really strong idea. So you can see how I kind of started with a big picture idea, or something I had read or something I had seen, and then just kind of tried to figure out what's that granule of truth that we can kind of get at, to start snowballing this idea. I want you to pause the video here. I want you to pull up this resource, this worksheet, and try to work through 3 ideas related to climate change, so like a local angle on climate change, that are from your head, right? Try to work through each of these columns and fill that out. And then we'll return back here and we'll keep going with the workshop. These ideas will come back later. So put some good work into it. All right, so pause here, try to figure out and write down 3 ideas that you have related to climate change. All right, y'all, welcome back. I hope that that was an interesting exercise, and that you learned something about what you notice out in the world. Anything can be a story. I'm telling you this. With the right angle, anything can be a story. So keep noticing things, right? And write that down. So when we're talking about an idea, that's one thing, right? We have ideas, and that's the germ of a story, right? You plant the seed almost, with the idea. But they're not quite the whole story, right? We have to do a bit more development to take an idea from an idea to a story pitch. So the next step is to think about what's newsworthy about this, right? This is kind of an advancement of that why should my community care question, right? So this is where the elements of newsworthiness come into play. So a few of you might already be familiar with this. What are the elements of newsworthiness? Let's review it. So here are the big ones. Timeliness. All right. So is this a story that unfolded recently? Is it hinged on an anniversary? So you'll see, every time 9/11 anniversary comes around, or even Pearl Harbor, something, that was a big moment, transformed our culture and society. You see stories around that even, years and years later. So that's timeliness at play in a different way. But did it unfold recently? Did this idea, is it relevant to a specific community, a specific place? Usually that will be an indicator of whether or not it's something to pursue. Does it involve conflict? Does it involve an agreement, a struggle, or rivalry? This doesn't necessarily have to mean 2 people fighting, right? Conflict can be people dealing with a struggle. Let's take climate change, for example, right? Like that's not necessarily us like fighting the planet. I guess it could be, but this is that struggle. There's tension there, for people, and what we're seeing environmentally. Another aspect of newsworthiness is human interest. People like reading stories about other people overcoming things and accomplishing things. And at the very heart of the human interest angle is, does the story evoke an emotional reaction, right? Does it evoke an emotional reaction? Can someone connect to the other person in the story? The last element of newsworthiness to think about is relevance, right? Is this relevant to the folks in my community? If it's not, are we going to write about it? This kind of forces you to think about your intended audience, right? Is this something that they would find useful? So it gets you outside of your bubble of what you think is interesting and forces you to look at what would other people think is interesting, right? So within that vein, we can't discuss with each other, but I'd love for y'all to drop into the comments of this video, or shoot me an email. I'm at jen@leadnola.org, of why you think this story is newsworthy. But I have a NOLA.com story, Times-Picayune story, about Mardi Gras, Mardi Gras 2020. and a study that was done tracing the coronavirus exposure likely to one person that led to a mass transmission of coronavirus. So this is a year later, right? But still relevant for understanding what happened. So here's the story. I'll make sure that y'all have the link to this, but I want you to give it a read. And I want you to think about the elements of newsworthiness that come to play in this story. Why is this newsworthy? Why did they choose to go through this go and pursue this angle? All right, so I'm gonna pause for a second to grab a drink of water. Pause the video, give this a read, come back, and I'll share a few thoughts about what I think. But again, I'd love for y'all to comment on the video or shoot me a note yourself. All right, welcome back. So why is this newsworthy? Why are we talking about this? Well, I think the big overarching thing that you probably hit on is coronavirus. It is an ongoing story. It is a massive story. It's a story of our lifetime. And any angle around coronavirus is newsworthy. The timing of this story. So we are right before Mardi Gras as I'm recording this. And this is about last Mardi Gras. So they're hinging this story on, you know, what this season we're in, right? This is also a study that just came out. So there's that timeliness aspect of it too. We're finally getting this data. This is also highly relevant to people who live in New Orleans and were out during that Mardi Gras. Everybody was thinking in their head, what kind of transmission was happening? Who was sick? You know, how many people were sick during Mardi Gras and didn't know it? You know, and this provides context to that. And there's also like inherent conflict. It's not people fighting or sides fighting, but it's like this conflict that we're in right now with Mardi Gras in New Orleans, where people want to go out, they want to be happy again and party and do all the things, but it's not safe. And this you know, lays out the numbers behind that, you know, so this is there is that tension, you know, and conflict in there, even though it's not about two people fighting, right? So highly newsworthy. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts as y'all share them. So let's keep pushing forward. How do we develop a story or an idea into a story pitch? All right, so this is the meat of our entire workshop here. We're gonna look at four things that you need to really dig into before you write your pitch and start writing it out. The first thing is, what is the point? That seems really on the nose, right? But what is the story really about? It's harder than it sounds, right? A lot of us will write the surface level of what a story is about, but you know, what is the central question that needs to be answered? I challenge you to think about your idea in the form of a question. What do you really need to find out? You know, what do you need to get the answers to? That will help you really home in on what the story is about. The second question is, what is your central evidence? All right, so this is where our journalism comes in. This is where our verification comes in of facts, our support, our people who can help us tell the story, right? So with your story idea, what kinds of evidence can be presented to verify or explain that central point or that question that you are trying to answer? It could be data, it could be people's stories, it could be anecdotes, right? It could even be images, quite frankly, you know, but what do you need to show your reader or your viewer to really let them know that you dug into this question? The third is, what is the central place? Where is the story taking place? Don't forget that. I've read a lot of pitches in my time where They hit on all these other questions, but I have no idea where they want to examine. Is this a local angle? Is this a national angle? Is this regional? Really tie it to place, because that will tell an editor whether or not this is something they're interested in. First and foremost, it's kind of the first thing they look for. And then the last thing is, who are the central characters? This kind of sounds like writing, creative writing, right? But we do have characters in our lives and in our stories, and people who help illustrate that central point. You want to make sure that you're spelling out in your pitch who you're going to talk to, who is going to tell you the answers to your central question, who's going to help you explain this story to others, all right? Because it can't all come from you. Because we care about equitable media and infusing equity into the journalistic process here at LEDE New Orleans, we want to layer on a few additional questions to make sure that you incorporate into your practice as an emerging journalist. We want to think about the best way to share information, especially with underrepresented communities. What's the best way to share your story with all communities? It's really not enough to say we're going to put it online and people can access it, because the truth is not everybody has regular internet access. So if this is information that you really need to share with a specific community, what's the best way to do that? Could you write a story and then also host an event or a discussion series? Think about that. We also want to think about what voices have historically gone overlooked or ignored, especially if this is a topic that's been covered before. And you'd be surprised if you ask people who you're talking to, who should I be talking to? Or who haven't we heard from in this story? A lot of people will tell you exactly who to talk to. It's just asking the question. So think about that. And then also think about, who is the person telling the story? If you're the one developing the idea, I'm guessing it's you. Think about your identity. What are you bringing to this story from your past and how you identify that could produce blind spots? We should be thinking about these with every story we go into, because the objective journalist is a myth, right? We all have pasts. We all have ways that we were raised. We all come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So we really need to take that into account when we're going to tell a story, and just take a moment to reflect. As me writing this story or recording and documenting the story, what might I be missing, and who can help me fill in those gaps? It's a big question, but it's so important. So important, and something that your generation will really be perfecting. And I look forward to seeing how y'all pursue that and do that. So we're going to wrap up today's workshop by developing one of my story ideas. So we're going to work together to do that, but you'll really watch how I go through developing an idea that from our brainstorm, but I want you to develop your own idea. Once you see how I kind of work through our worksheet, I want you to take one of your ideas that you brainstormed and work through it on your own. So this is where the second worksheet and resource that we have comes into play. So go ahead and pull that up. Actually, let me show you what it looks like first, so you know what I'm asking you to pull up. This resource looks like this. Okay, so this is our guide to developing a story pitch. And you'll see there's a series of questions. It looks more intimidating than it is. So I'm gonna make a copy, and I am going to work through an idea from our brainstorm earlier. I think I want to take this one. This one's really fascinating to me. So how are young kids dealing and coping with climate anxiety in New Orleans, a very climate threatened city? So let's run with it, right? Our first step, and this is probably the hardest question, it's unfair that we throw it up first, but it's to write a headline. Writing a headline really helps you think about what that central story is, you know, and what would make people want to read about this story. So I'll admit I cheated a little bit. I have some notes, so I'm not taking this out of my head. I spent some time with it. So don't think that I'm writing a headline right off the bat, but a headline that might apply to this story. I'm making up a fictitious quote. Don't do that in real life, but just to get my mind going, I'm starting my headline with a quote. It's scary how New Orleans kids are coping with climate change. All right, so I have our place in the headline. I have who we are talking to. We don't like to use kids in headlines or in writing, really. Children is the preferred term for young people. I might even say like elementary schoolers, right? Just get really detailed at who I want to talk to. We're talking about the young ones, you know, no offense, high schoolers. But, you know, or we could say high schoolers, you know, whoever you want to focus in on, but this is an opportunity to get really specific, right? And help yourself narrow that down. What is the background of the story? Well, I read about children and getting climate change anxiety. And I could say I read a national story about that, right? And I want to pursue a local angle. And here I could drop the link, right, to some of the stories that I've read in the past. Okay, so we're working our way through here, all right? These are not complicated questions, right? But it's making us think a little bit more than if we just blah a story out, a story idea out. What central questions do I need to explore in this story? What central questions do I need to explore in the story? I can think of two big ones, right? So one is, are kids in New Orleans experiencing anxiety about climate change? Like, is my whole thesis bunk? You know, our kids actually experience this? So I have to figure that out, right? But once we do figure that out, how is that showing up, right? So that's kind of like an add-on to this first question. Another question is, how are adults responding to that? Are they aware, you know? Because that's probably who's going to be reading or watching the story. Okay, so those are two big questions, and they have to do with the experience, right? The storytelling part of it. That's who I have to. That's what I have to get at. So who do I need to talk to make this happen? Well, children, right? They're the central part of the story. What about parents? What about teachers, right? Like teachers who might be teaching science at an elementary school level and dealing with some of these topics. I can think about like youth psychologists or children's psychologists, people who are studying how children cope with anxiety on a normal basis. Maybe there are studies and research out there that looks specifically at climate change, and I can talk to some of those experts, right? It would be interesting to talk to climate change experts. Maybe even they have kids and they can say how they talk to their kids, right? Interesting angle there. What about environmental activists? Same thing as the climate change experts. Perhaps people have families, right? So how do people who think about this and talk about this every day, how do they talk to their kids about climate change? And last, I would love to talk to maybe some youth activists, right? So young people who are raising this issue. How do they think young people should be talked to? So you can see here, I have a very long list of potential groups of people that I could talk to, all who are stakeholders in this story, right? Who do you plan on interviewing? Why them? This is where you get a little bit more detailed. I don't really have folks that I plan on interviewing quite yet, but what I would do would I would start likely with parents, right? And try to reach out to parent groups. There's tons of resources on Facebook for parents, and just kind of say like, hey, is anybody dealing with this, with their children? You can also start with research, any research that's been done. I'd go back to these stories that I'd read and see what sources that they've referenced and what is the local equivalent of that, right? And then of course, experts are pretty readily available to find, and they might even, tell you about their families and how they talk to their kids. So you get the snowball rolling there. So that's what would go in this box here. In terms of photo and video to illustrate the story, photos of young people, portraits of young people would be ideal in this case, right? Just showing who we're talking to in their lives. Speak to. I think video would be really powerful in this, right? So video of young people, of the people, the children we interview, talking about what they experience, right? I also had this thought of, like getting young, if it were really young kids in the story, like could we get them to draw something about climate change or how they deal with it and have drawings, as part of it. So more of a creative idea. But all of that comes together to present the story, right, of young people who are dealing with this. You also want to think about like what other visuals might come into play. I could think of if there's hard data on climate change anxiety in young people, that could be a good opportunity for a graphic. So we'll put climate change anxiety graphic or something like that. Last is we bury this question, but this goes back to who the person is, right? Reporting on the story. Do you have an opinion about the issues addressed in the story? How will you show other perspectives? I'm not going to really delve into whether climate change is real or not. It's real. We're not going to go down that road. But I think that there's something to think about here in terms of who you're talking to. So, for example, I can see myself really going toward white families, right? Upper socioeconomic class who are thinking about these issues in a different way. But just like knowing my circles and knowing the parents I know, right? If you're starting with your own network, you have to be aware of who you might be talking to. So one thing I would try to be aware of is who I'm talking, who are the parents I'm bringing into this story? Are we reaching out to our Black and Brown communities and trying to get perspectives from those communities? What sort are two-parent households, single-parent households, trying to get different perspectives in there. Maybe this should be a story about how Black and Brown children are experiencing climate change anxiety and how that might be overlooked. You might find different angles within the angle that could help bring it to life more and help tell a better story. So as you can see, we did a lot of work, there's a lot of information in here. We're not going to go through this entire guide, but you guys will get this entire guide to go through. It goes on to talk about how you write an email pitch and walks you through taking the information up here and putting it into a pitch. That I'm going to let you all do on your own. All right, so if you want to stop the video here, I highly encourage you to take one of your ideas from your brainstorming session. Try to walk through the steps that I walked through with yourself. Try to figure out and dig into some of those questions and take notes. It's good to practice, and who knows, this might turn into a story idea for you. So go ahead and pause the video here, work through that worksheet, and return once you get through that first section. Welcome back. So hopefully by now you've worked through our pitch guide to think about your central question, the central people you need to talk to, any sort of visuals that might accompany the story idea of yours. You are well on your way to developing a pitch, and I really encourage you to write one out. You'll see at the end of that resource, there's actually an example of like a mock story pitch that one might email. Go ahead and try to write one out. I'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and pitch me. I'd love to do that. So with this, we do have a survey related to this workshop. I would love for you all to take that and just let us know how this went for you. Did you learn something? Is there something we should have spent more time on? Give us that feedback. It makes a difference. Also, I want to point out that we will be continuing this workshop in late February, February 20, I'm not going to say the date. Go to our website, www.leadnola.org/events, and you will get the dates of all of our February workshops in there. I highly recommend, if this was something that you found helpful, to sign up for that. They are virtual, so you can sign on and do some live workshopping of your ideas. With that, I'm Jennifer Larino. We are LEDE New Orleans. Thank you so much for tuning in to this workshop, and I look forward to reading your survey feedback and maybe a few pitches. You send them my way. All right, thanks y'all.